I know my hallucinations, and that's not one of them.
I think I just hit the record button exactly in time to catch the beginning of that sentence that I couldn't get
Yes. That's a tagline for somebody.
I know my hallucinations.
And that's not one of them.
Okay, anyway, so
So,
with this
I think
thing,
we're
so
good.
what the heck are we doing, Amanda? Are we gonna strike your whole thing from the record and do it again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't seem very confident about that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So what
I like
what
on
was the? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, it's your turn.
I know. So you guys are more. Now I feel like I'm up in front of an entire room of people staring at me while I was supposed to give a speech.
You put yourself there.
Yeah.
That was your idea.
Yeah, you did it.
Doesn't stop me from feeling that way.
You're like, we still are where we are.
I mean, not to say that that's a bad thing. Saying there's no reason to feel nervous. You're the one who decided to get up and speak because you had a reason to.
Yeah. You had something important to say.
So that's kind of where I wanted to start. If that was what we were going to do, we really only got we only really addressed it really, really briefly in text. What was it that why this? I guess what made you want to redo it? What got you thinking, or what about the previous were you dissatisfied with, or you get the series of questions I'm asking. Address.
Yeah. So in preparation for today, I started doing more stuff because I wanted more detailed notes on my end to go off of.
Okay.
Because I do lose my place and forget why I put something in. Okay, yeah, so I wanted better notes because I felt like I couldn't remember some of the reasons that I put some things on there, and I work better with notes.
Sure.
And as I was reading, I realized that I chose a social democracy not because that's what I really want, but because I think that would be the easiest to get to.
So
the quickest
okay, because you're ultimately a reformist.
Right.
Okay. Cool.
So, what would you want to look at now? Like, where do you want to go?
Okay, so in an ideal world, to me, would be non-market socialism. So where the goods and services that are offered to people are offered and created for the good of everyone. There's no monetary value to it.
Okay.
So rather than thinking of overhead and all of that, you can just think of supply quantity and how to get more. And that would cause people to also think of better ways to make supplies, rather than using plastic and that kind of thing, find renewable things that can be used, or recyclable things that can be used. It's kind of like the world that was explained by Picard in First Contact to the lady from the 21st century.
And also by Kirk to the lady in the 20th century.
Yes.
In the Voyage Home. Yeah.
Yes.
Don't tell me you don't use money. Well, we don't.
Yeah. Also, there was a book called The Host by Stephanie Meyer or Myers.
It's Meyer.
It's Meyer.
It's Meyer? Mm-hmm. Okay. And specifically, we were talking about the type of society the aliens in The Host had.
Okay, so I don't know jack about this. The only thing I associate with Stephanie Meyer is obviously going to be fucking Twilight. So if you could...
So the book is about aliens come, take over the world,
Body snatcher
like
style.
body snatchers. Yeah. And the reason they come to this world is because they see how much turmoil and war and whatnot and pollution there is. So they are coming to make the world better before we destroy it.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah. But, humans, we don't like to be conquered. So
We're against
there are
that.
some that are fighting back. The main characters are one of these aliens, and the body who is hosting her consciousness survives.
Okay.
So everything, most of what's going on is within the same head. But there is a scene specifically in that book where she goes into a store, grabs a case of water, and goes up to the clerk. The clerk scans it. She walks out without paying. And the human consciousness starts questioning her about it, and she explains that they just need to do that for stock purposes, like to make sure that they can replenish that for the next person who needs it.
Okay.
So that's
it sounds like Stephanie took a quick break from writing angsty fiction to read a whole bunch of fucking Marx and Kropotkin.
right.
Like,
Right.
this is really, really communist.
So if you're actually paying attention to that portion and like the differences that there are between, it's very unitist. It's very because the whole thing is that these were two completely separate people.
Yeah.
Completely different
You mean as
ideologies.
in the host and the...
Yes.
Okay.
The alien and the host. Yeah. Completely different ideologies, and they end up not just her and her, but them and everybody that they find her in the not necessarily everybody in the two species, but she goes to they make their way to a hideout of humans who have hidden and are rebelling, basically trying to get the planet back.
Bunch of anarchists.
Yeah. So they end up going to them, and they end up learning from each other. They end up loving this alien. Like, they went out, she taught them how to take the aliens out of the body without hurting anybody.
Okay.
And they figured out a way to send the aliens to another planet that they occupy.
Why?
To not have to kill them. Because it takes they're in a cryostasis, and then they can only go the speed of light, so they send them to hundreds of thousands of light years away.
That'll take hundreds of thousands of years.
Exactly.
Oh. Well,
so they can't.
But it sounds like they were pretty good. Was there some detriment to having aliens around?
They were body snatchers.
Well, but they sound like they were pretty good.
But that's the thing.
Could they not have coexisted?
No.
Why?
Well, they could have.
I'm asking plot detail. I don't know anything about this.
No.
I don't understand the mechanics.
In the book, obviously, it is supposed to be seen from the human's point of view of, we don't want anyone coming in and killing us, basically, because most of the people that not body snatchers, but the aliens go into, most of the hosts that the aliens take over don't survive. Their consciousness dies.
Oh.
So they viewed it as a mass homicide, I guess.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, if most people who are indwelt end up dying due to it, that would be a problem that would need solving. I see that was a wrinkle that you kind of
I'm sorry.
You left it on the back burner, and I was like, because I don't know, this just seems like these guys would have been probably a pretty positive societal influence, if it wasn't for the possession.
Yeah.
There you go. Possession part.
If they could have coexisted, but these aliens. So how did they survive without? Did they only have hosts?
Yeah.
And
the
was it just because of they couldn't survive on Earth?
They can survive on their origin planet, but they've spread across the universe. Outside of their origin planet and the cryo chambers, they can't survive.
Okay.
So she realizes that the rebel humans are pretty much living the same way because they're all working. They all have certain jobs. Everything they do is to keep everybody else alive.
Oh.
Yeah. Like they have an underground, because they're in the desert of like Arizona or Nevada or something like that. They have an underground tunnel system that has a natural spring in there. There's a huge cavern where just enough light gets in for them to be able to have an underground farm. Basically,
So
they were able to teach each other what was good about. So it was like you take non-market socialism, communism, whatever you want to call it, aliens who teaches the humans how to be socialist. They teach each other.
They teach them how to do a socialism.
Yes. And they actually like they come together to realize that they're not as bad. So it's basically the humans realizing that the aliens aren't as bad as they think they are.
Uh-huh.
While this one alien who thought that the humans were just murderous savages.
The alien should have watched more than Fox News.
Right? Was able to help with that. So because you can't really talk to the aliens if they're not in a host,
yeah,
they had to send them away.
And yeah, it was okay. That's all sensible. So what you're saying is like the real aliens were the friends we met along the way.
Yes. But no, I
okay.
that,
No, so I'm. Let's see. There was stuff about this I definitely wanted to talk about. So okay, actually, this gets back to questions I was going to ask if you hadn't made it clear, but then you did make it clear. But now you've made it clear in the opposite direction, which is awesome. So you are. It sounds like so you're not a social democrat. You're a democratic socialist. Willing to use social democracy as a stepping stone to democratic socialism.
yes.
That is awesome. Do you ultimately support capitalism? And if so, why?
I ultimately no. I can see how it can be used to kind of turn in the direction of socialism.
Okay.
With obviously, like laws would have to be enacted / changed. I don't know specific ones, so please don't ask me. To make
No, that's okay. That's
I don't want
that's
to say
honestly a big enough topic that it would be hard to say. Like, damn it,
because it cut me.
You were
off.
asking if capitalism.
Oh yeah, okay. So I can see how capitalism can be used to kind of because it's gonna have to be gradual. Because if you try to do it all at once, people who don't agree with it or understand it will just try to fight back and probably end up
Destroying everything.
Yeah.
that's probably true. Yeah.
But I can see how capitalism can be used to like kind of gradually turn it into a market socialism and then gradually turn it into non-market.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
It does.
Cool.
It makes very good sense. And actually,
I like this better with you guys asking me questions rather than me just giving like my thing and then you asking me questions.
Because
well, I was hoping what we could do, and obviously this was never going to be like nothing was ever going to be a sure thing. I didn't mean for it to be anybody like soapboxing. More so just to have a general structure for the kind of a conversational guide.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily mean for it to be.
Well, I'm glad I did all that research still, because if you guys ask me a question, I should have an answer.
No.
So don't give me that one.
No, we were talking about that earlier. I was like, this should be just like that, where it's because the best conversation happens when you have this back and forth dialogue. I think.
Yes, agree, totally.
Where you kind of can feel out like if I'm somebody who doesn't know anything about what you're talking about, opposed to you soapboxing, which after a while is just going to be too much information for me to take in.
Yeah.
ask you questions about the.
That's really hard. That is totally yes, man. I
Yeah.
could not agree more. That's because we're coming from a place that you're not coming from. If you just get nothing but an information dump, you're gonna have too many questions, one right after the other, to focus on any one thing we say, and then like nobody walks away from the non-conversation having learned anything.
Yeah, I didn't even know anything about like the social democracy thing that you were talking about until we actually started like talking about it just right now, and then looking into it a little bit further, I was like, oh, that doesn't sound half bad. Now, of course, my biggest concern, and I think this is just going to be a concern for me across the board, that sounds great.
But
Does it work in Birmingham, Alabama? I mean, I'm sure you guys understand what I mean.
I absolutely understand what you mean, and there's a we get there.
Okay.
This is a thing I like. We kind of started to graze on this last time, and I feel like I need to lay it off just a little bit further down because, potentially not, but also yes, and also no.
Because you'd probably have to change a whole lot of things, and it'd be a whole lot of people getting hurt in the process.
Well, not necessarily. No, not like you think, because reasons that I can get into later. And they're specifically relevant to my thing, although what I'm trying to determine now, Amanda, is how our things differ, because it doesn't sound like very, very much.
Really?
Well, not so far. So you're for non-market, which means that, okay, so eventually you'd like to see the abolition of currency. No more capital accumulation, no more unit of transaction, basically.
Right.
What about government? Should there be a state, I guess?
Right. And I guess that would be where you and I would probably differ, for now at least.
Well, again, if we're talking from the mind of a reformist, like, not the steps you would take necessarily, although, sometime I'd definitely be interested to know how you think we might reach whatever your ideal condition is. But for the time being, let's keep it restricted to what I guess your ideal is. How should things be once we've accomplished what we want to accomplish? What is it that we want to accomplish? What would the government look like, or would there still be one?
I don't know that there would necessarily be like a central government.
Okay.
I don't see, that's one part I didn't really think about. Like, I know where our issues,
okay, let's flesh it out right
some
now.
of the issues with our current form of government is, but there would have to be, if not governing bodies, at least what's it called? Logistics.
Sort of like having an operations manager just for like your society.
Yeah.
So like a council of councils?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Just people who, whether it's like actually
like for instance, people whose job isn't necessarily to be legislators. They don't make laws, but they can be representatives. Like, so, let's say an individual community had a group of people who was elected by the people short term to represent them to the representatives of other communities in periodic meetings. They'd all bring their news and their concerns to each other. They'd all come back with the news and concerns of everyone else, and then like everybody would work together to address all that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're an anarcho-communist.
Okay then.
You actually are on board.
In my perfect world.
I would like to, I'm going to send you something real quick. It's a link to a book.
Okay, then maybe you should turn my rose to a black one.
Maybe I should, because you need to read The Conquest of Bread. If you read The Conquest of Bread and you come away with it from anything other than, yeah, this is exactly the thing that makes any fucking sense at all and is what we should do, I'd be shocked.
Okay.
Oh gosh, I just love this so much. This is so, this warms my fucking heart.
Well, then I guess
My black and red heart.
Those always have been my favorite colors.
They have been.
Makes sense now.
I know, right? Man.
Well, then I guess we can kind of combine mine and yours.
kind of seems like it, because
Good.
maybe, like, I don't know, like I said, the terminology might not have been all the way
have
there.
so many
I
questions.
have so many questions.
I love that you have so many questions.
I know you've done so much more research, and I am just color me curious.
I know.
I am just absolutely
I am
fascinated.
under the belief or impression that people who grow up struggling either end up loving or at least be like either being obsessed with or at least loving money and the pursuit of it,
Yep.
or hating it, like hating the struggle to get it.
You know what the funny thing is?
Absolutely.
I don't want to completely blame it on this, but I'm kind of going to.
What is it?
I blame hip hop for that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't.
I can see
Because
what
in
it
as
was
much
like.
as, like we talked about before, with hip hop music being a uniting force, that many people from many different cultural backgrounds ended up latching onto real hard. Well, we talked about how it was a uniting force specifically because it had a central message that so many people from what appeared to be disparate backgrounds could relate to.
Right.
It wasn't, hip hop wasn't the first thing though that ever glorified money or the accumulation of wealth. That had been going on for a really, really long time, and maybe, I mean, because of the music industry, but mainly Hollywood and stuff, and every ideal that we held about wealth and richness from the depths of the Great Depression onward. I feel like hip hop might not have represented that as much as it did, especially throughout the 80s and very much the 90s, had it not been for the fact that the communities of people that the OG rappers came from had been so denied those things by the people in power up until that point.
I will. Okay, let me rephrase that then. I don't think it's hip hop's problem. I think it's rap's problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the difference between hip hop is storytelling. Hip hop is Nas. Hip hop is early '80s Run DMC.
Okay.
Rap is mumble rap. It's music that's made more for the beat than it is for the lyrical content.
It's Kanye.
No,
Kanye.
no, not even later Kanye. It's Fetty Wap. It's Post Malone.
It's a little bit later Kanye.
I think your hatred of Kanye kind of clouds you too.
No, like I'm serious. Like earlier Kanye, like Hey Mama was great. It was hip hop. But
he even had songs like that on Yeezus. I mean, they weren't good, but he still had that kind of content on there.
Well, so
but I'm thinking
this
about
is interesting.
like
I've never heard of genre talked about this way in a what its content is versus what it does musically.
Yeah,
that sounds like what you're talking about is literary genre, not musical genre.
Yes, but that has always been you would never put. Let's go back to like mid 2000s when when that line really started forming. You would never put an artist, say like Common or Mos Def, in the same category that you would put someone like a Master P or that whole Lil Jon, that space, because they're two different forms of artists. That's when you really started seeing the divide. Before that point, it mostly was all hip hop.
Well, I feel like that's the point where, well, no, it's way past the point where what I would have thought of as the different subgenres of rap started to be named. Although again, that's actually way later than that actually started to happen. I would have thought. I'm speaking as a layman here, not very much an outside observer, and not a very close one. That's never really been in my realm, so I can't.
But yeah, a lot of genres of music have that kind of when they start to subset off.
Yeah,
it's just hip hop didn't get it until later, much later in its development.
It's
younger
I guess.
than most a lot of.
Yeah, that's I guess what I'm thinking is like it seems like when rap started in the late 70s, it was like no time flat before people started doing totally different things with it. Which is true of like pretty much every other musical genre. I mean, you know, jazz didn't just stay jazz for very long.
Yeah.
Jazz became a whole bunch of other stuff real fast, and so did everything else.
Yeah, because you have people's different artistic interpretations.
Well, and because media critics get paid a lot to name things different things.
Yeah.
You know, they're gonna coin their buzzwords, and that's why you know, the entirety of the metal community is like 100% splintered over what any single band is called genre wise. Like you know, nobody can decide on what the definition of gent is, and that's a fucking debate that's been going on for 15 years. Not like it fucking matters, but
but it's still a debate.
It's a thing.
But no,
maybe it's a thing. Maybe it's not a thing anymore. I don't know. I haven't really been involved
why I was saying that I think rap kind of did that is because when that splinter happened, that's when you started having rappers talk about how much money they had, how much like the ice cost on the wrist, how much the house was, how much the Bentley Phantom was on the line.
But even earlier than that, though, they were talking about. Okay, yeah, actually, that maybe is the really interesting split. Is not the having tons of money, but how they made it.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the 90s, well, late 80s, early 90s, with the whole gangster rap phase, they put a giant premium on having tons of money, but they were talking about getting it from street hustle.
Yep.
Rather than having bling and Bentleys, right?
Yep. So you started with the idea of
having money at all rather than status symbols.
Exactly. So what you were talking about when you first said like it was more about how like you had people who didn't have money in their pursuit of it. That was one phase.
Yeah.
Then you went into the later phase, which is like, to me, to me, that started around like 97, 98.
Sure.
And
yeah.
That's when you really started getting rappers who had success doing like selling drugs and stuff like that. And then they were boasting about what they did with the money when they got it.
Yeah.
So
damn, that's interesting.
So to me, that's where you see a lot of people really started wanting to talk about like, oh, this is what money can do for you.
Yeah.
This, you know, and people wanting to pursue that more so than I'm just pursuing money to live.
That's goddamn, that's really fascinating to think about.
Mm-hmm.
The way that the portrayal changed over time and why.
It is. Because if you would have stuck to even NWA. Because with Easy and with Cube, it was never like, this is why I'm rapping. I'm rapping so I can go get the 6'4". I'm rapping so I can go get the gold chains. It wasn't that.
Yeah. It was I'm rapping to bring along social justice.
Yeah, I'm rapping to make sure my mama got a house.
Mm-hmm.
I'm rapping to make sure that I don't have to be in the streets doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But then, as unfortunately sometimes with human nature, that wasn't enough. It had to become idealistic. I don't know, idealistic's not the word I want. It had to become aspirational.
Okay.
Like, it wasn't enough anymore to aspire to want to be settled. You had to aspire to, I want the mega mansion. I want that. The I want culture in rap. And to me, it's where it messed itself up. And this is coming from somebody who, when I was younger, hell, all the way until pretty much Amanda came, my aspirations were similar.
Okay.
Because to me, that's what I was always taught. It wasn't so
much. That's
much
what you're supposed to want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're supposed to grind to want to go get that stuff. You're not just supposed to settle on the fact of buying a house and putting your kids through college. And like, my parents, all things considered, still talk about how rough, how, they're not good, but I told, and it's so funny how somebody else's life experiences kind of changes and dictates how you view things. One of my new coworkers grew up in Gary, and he was telling me just how ridiculously rough his life is. I mean, it was up until he got it together and like got away from it and started to make something of himself.
Gary has a hell of a reputation.
I heard, and that's because I mean, not growing up out here. In my head, I'm like, dude, that's where Michael Jackson grew up. Like, is it not that anymore?
It's
He's
not
like,
that
no.
anymore.
He's like, no, it is not. But
I work with a lot of dudes who need to travel a lot, and they consequently know a lot of dudes who travel a lot, and there's not a single goddamn one of them. If they were stranded for gas, they would not stop in Gary, Indiana. They would call a heavy duty tow truck, and they would wait as long as it took, and they would not take a chance on exiting the freeway. Gary is a scary place, as I understand it. I've never been there for obvious reasons.
I did not. Yeah, I didn't know that until recently. But telling him the idea that my parents put 3 boys through private school in California, the face that he gave me was like, I just told him my parents were millionaires, and I was like, they
comparatively.
Yeah, and that's the part that it's fascinating to me.
You have a real narrow view of what life is like when you're growing up in whatever life you have growing up, and I get that, man. That's I was for not uncomfortably long time. I feel like it's okay-ish for me to have been the kind of ignorant that I was for the length of time I was, because you do have to have like a certain number of years under your belt before you can, well, depending on your circumstance, and as far as that kind of thing goes, I definitely had it kind of easy, not having to be too exposed to how horrible other people have it. So I for a long time, although not too far into adulthood, I thought that generally speaking, while I never was one to be so naive as to think that racism was dead, I thought that like systemic racism had been annihilated, basically with the civil rights movement. I thought that, ever since the 60s, everything's been fine, right? Like, to my defense, I only thought that until I was like 19 or so, but still. But the only reason is because I couldn't have known better. I had no exposure to it at all up to that point, and it took meeting people from those kinds of backgrounds to know, because I'd never had the opportunity to talk with anyone who was from that kind of a background before. But it's extremely alive. It's extremely well. It's still just thrashing the living shit out of just entirely too many lives. That's not something that stopped. It didn't even diminish. It just stopped getting media coverage.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's fucked that it took so long for so many people to have to reckon with that. How many people should have by now, but still haven't, not even because they haven't been exposed to it. They just don't believe it when they see it.
Yeah, because at that point, as long as it doesn't directly affect me and what I do.
Well, because by that point, it's just something on the TV.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
You don't have to reckon with it being a fact of someone else's life. It's just something that you saw on TV, and anything that's on TV can be true or not.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hell, RJ was pulled over the other day. He was going out to the store because we forgot to get milk or something. But it was like 8 o'clock at night. And he's like, well, I got to get this, So we don't go to the one down the street because that's the hood one.
I guess it's a little rough
at night. So he was just going the extra minutes over to the Waynedale one, and he wasn't even 2 minutes from the house. And a cop pulled him over, telling him he pulled him over for driving erratically.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he told him to, basically get back home.
And then followed me home.
Followed him home.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Fucking Indiana.
Yeah.
Although not unique to Indiana.
No.
It's all over the place, but still, I feel compelled to say fucking Indiana.
Yeah.
That is the part, and it's funny because it kind of brings the conversation back. That is what scares me about letting society. I mean, granted,
get that.
we're we're in a capitalist environment right now, and shit's still happening. So I can't say one way or another. But what's scary about the idea of letting the group as a whole dictate what's best for everybody, that terrifies me.
I get that. 100%. Man, I'm really, really, really glad to have you in on these conversations because, like I was saying the other night, this just doesn't get addressed that much. We talk about a lot of things and a lot of particular kinds of systemic inequality, but generally we talk about that in very class-specific ways, as in the capitalists versus the working class, not necessarily taking care of the people that are in specific subsets of the working class and how very specifically racism factors in or could and should factor into our considerations of these things. I think that there is a way that we kind of tend to skirt it a little bit in a way that I don't think is necessarily inaccurate, and I'll address that in a minute, but is probably also a bit naive to expect within the first, let's say, again, we managed to throw a successful revolution and we actually get the change we want. I think that people's perceptions of each other and our conceptions of race would begin to change, and I think that would happen pretty rapidly, but I don't think that they'd be complete for probably a good 2 generations. Yeah. And what would happen in the interim could be either not much or catastrophic. And I don't know how to mitigate that. No one does, obviously. This isn't really a thing that's
we were talking about this a little bit earlier because, I can't help myself. And we were talking a little bit about it to get my head, in the right space for what I wanted to say today. Mm-hmm. But not, so deep into it that he wouldn't still have questions.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I brought up was, and it'll take a few generations, is after starting to, after the revolution, basically.
I was going to say, you need to start calling it what it is.
Yeah.
It's, after the revolution.
After maybe not necessarily the full revolution where we go to that system, but after
the transition happens.
Yes.
Or after the transition begins.
Yes. A big part of alleviating any of the bigotry, especially when it comes to race, is going to have to be an educational thing. It's going to have to be educating the children, because I was using our family as an example. Most of our family, starting with Great Pap being horrible racist.
So bad.
So bad.
So bad.
Yeah, she told me.
But you see the generations after that and how that lessened with each generation.
That's part of that's mainstreaming.
Yeah.
Basically at work.
So that right there, it'll take a while. And there will be those morons that try to over revolutionize.
See, well, I understand that the problem with that thinking, and I'm with you. I'm right there with you, but I understand that the problem with that thinking from the perspective of somebody who is on the unfavorable side of that history, is very much that the fact that it's that we've come so far and yet we're still so far from true equality, from actual acceptance.
Right.
And the fact that we're still there does not bode well for the way things might turn if there wasn't some kind of
structure.
Well, legal protection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the part when hearing you guys say that you don't want a government at all is terrifying.
But
see, what's terrifying? I'm sorry, it's not my turn. You go. I've got a rebuttal to that, but not a 100% one, but it's a little bit of
my
so much of this shit. It's kind of it's a bit nuanced, and there's I can't start without getting into it. So just
right. So, but my thinking is that's why it would have to start with more social democracy, is because then you can still have the state to enact those laws to protect those people and to punish the others.
Mm.
You know? So
But
start with that, but then that's why it would take a few generations to even get to the ideal.
I get that, and if it works, it would be absolutely fantastic.
You know what's funny? That's actually that's a really common thing to hear among leftists in general, but even among anarchists who have kind of a little more specific goals than the general leftists. Is like, I have my ideas for how things should be. I have my ideas for how best to accomplish this. But honestly, like, if it works, let's do that. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like, don't get me wrong. What you're describing, Amanda, sounds like paradise.
Like, the end game sounds really good, but the getting there, it could be fucking hell.
Exactly, because what I would run into and where I struggle with this is that in the interim, trying to get that resolved, somebody who looks like me may not have it as easy.
Yeah, that could be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, I mean, and don't get me wrong, everybody would have a problem with the transition. I don't want to make it seem like, just minorities would just be screwed. That's not entirely the case. There would be a lot of
but as with every other point in history, minorities would probably have it harder.
Exactly.
I mean, just
it is. That's history.
The way it's been, and there's no reason to think it would suddenly be different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So why?
And that's a problem with mine too. Like I don't have like a super solid answer to that. I do have reasons to think that would not be as big an issue as a lot of people would fear, because of. But it's honestly, it's not practical. It's the philosophical angle.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of putting some faith in people to be better than they typically are now, and that very much comes from what I blame for people being the way they are now. Not that's part 4. That's part 4.
So I do believe we've come to the point in our show now where you, kind sir,
educate me on my beliefs.
Well, fill in for what you didn't know yet.
Yes. Because
I just hearing you talk about this for the last 2 recording sessions, I'm well, and the snippets of conversation before where we started to address it, I was kind of surprised, which is like the thing that really piqued my interest the most when you posted your olives was like, I was shocked to hear, well, to see that you seemed to identify yourself as a social democrat, which was way closer to center than I thought you were, and turns out was like way closer to center than you actually are. That the ideal world you envision is so close to mine, which again I just absolutely love, and also I'm not surprised by. And not because of you or the views that you've expressed to me in the past and any of that. It's that every time I talk about this stuff with someone, if they'll make any concession at all, it's that the thing I'm proposing, the end game, sounds really fucking good. It's just that no one agrees that what it's going to take to get there is possible. And I can see why. And all the concerns that RJ has raised so far are amazing and probably pretty damn accurate reasons why that would be difficult to achieve. Totally get that. And I can, that's this calls for skepticism. We need that. We need that in this movement, because we can't accomplish this if it doesn't work for everyone.
Right.
It's just not possible to do. We have to get it right the first time. Now, that's not to say we have to get it perfect the first time. It's just we have to set off with the right set of ideals, with the right set of expectations. The understanding that the first time we try this, it's not going to accomplish anything perfect. And this is one of the core values of anarchism, is understanding that it is a process, not a goal. Anarchism is a lens through which to view the world, the people in it, the systems we put in place, the behaviors we exhibit, everything we enact. It's a lens through which to view all that, not an end game. Anarchism is not a goal. Anarchism is a tool. The values of anarchism are, first of all, no state, which is to say no rulers. We fundamentally believe that humans are capable, not only capable of self-governance, but tend toward it naturally when there are no outside influences. We don't believe we need anyone to tell us what is good and what is not. We think that all people are fundamentally capable of ascertaining that for themselves. And if you take any set of people, let's say it was the three of us and whatever, our each of our like 5 closest friends and family members. So we've got like 18 people, assuming no overlap for some reason. 18 people wash up on, some island in the Pacific. Do we start out with the idea that one person needs to be the leader, or we meet together to make decisions? Like, do we talk about how food needs to be rationed? Do we elect one person to be like the sheriff of the island and enforce arbitrary rules, or do we all just work together to get it done? Whatever it is we need to do to survive, however we need to ration the food, however we need to build shelter, however we need to deal with the provisions we had on hand when we washed up, we don't automatically organize ourselves into power structures. Like, that's just not the natural state for us. We look at what we've got at hand. We work together to make things as good as they can be for all of us. We assume that is one of the things that humans just do. Not because like that's an idealized version of what humans do, but because when you put humans in the kind of position, when you put humans in the kind of situation where that's what they need to do to get by, to survive, to thrive, they just fucking do that. Power structures are entirely artificial. Cooperation is not. It's just what we do. And so to an anarchist, rulers aren't needed because we know we're capable of handling ourselves. We only get adversarial when there is either the real or perceived scarcity of some necessary resource, crucially, and 2, that resource is hoarded by few. Those are the preconditions for human antagonism. We don't really do that if that's not the case. If those 2 conditions aren't met, we generally are willing to be cooperative. To that end, or rather through that lens, we as anarchists tend to believe that there is no need for a state, because a state does nothing more than create artificial hierarchies. When you pit one human against another, if you can convince at least one of them they're in a fight for their lives, that person becomes violent. That person becomes antagonistic. That person becomes antisocial. But we are social animals. We couldn't get by without it. How can you possibly explain antisocial behavior in a species that is necessarily social? Like we can't get by if we aren't willing to behave pro-socially. We would never have made it this far if we weren't willing to work together. Well, I guess I'm getting a little bit too far ahead. This is still part 4.
Right.
Back to part 3. The anarchist position is people can and do work together to get things done. And more importantly than almost anything else, we oppose hierarchy. Hierarchy, we believe, is almost entirely artificial. Or rather, we do specify unjust hierarchy of the kind that, for instance, capitalism necessarily creates. We believe in a flat hierarchy, which is to say democracy, and that is more conducive to the thriving of humanity. I can't believe I'm having so much trouble with this, but I totally see where you guys are both coming from.
Right?
This is actually really hard I do this every fucking day and I can't do it right now. Like, the presentation is difficult.
Yeah.
Okay,
I don't have an actual script here, and because I don't have an actual script, I'm kind of like having trouble.
Right?
But you know what? That's awesome, because in that. So can I interject with a question while you're getting it together?
Please.
So
I do that way easier than I do whatever the hell I'm trying to do right now.
Yeah.
I'm really good at answering questions.
So, and again, because my lens is different, just follow me on this one.
Yeah.
So let's say, ideal scenario, government, it does not exist. Like, there's no hierarchy that exists, and we all are intended to work together. Sort of the idea of when you said with the 18 people on the island.
Slightly larger, but yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that concerns me about that scenario, and why I would be hesitant to get on board, would be how do you explain away then those people who just want to watch the world burn? How do you keep those from messing everything up?
Who exactly are those people? What's that mean? Like,
so like, for example, the Charleston shooter.
okay.
No, the guy who shot up the church in Charleston, South Carolina. There, no rhyme, no reason.
Well, that was specifically that was a racism thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I kind of get to that idea where, I mean,
okay,
in a place where you are self-governed, what happens to him?
What happens to him should he commit an act like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because, well, the reason why
I just had a really, really pretty good conversation with a dude the other night about this. We got to thinking about this because there are definitely we have no reason to think yet, because we've never lived in a society in which this sort of egalitarian mindset was expected of people.
right.
So we don't have any like practical data at hand to predict how often this kind of thing might happen in that kind of a society, and more importantly, why, if it did, why. How would we deal with something like that? I definitely allowed for it the other night in the conversation because everything about this is hypothetical. So you have to start somewhere. If we're going to discuss this, if this is going to be the kind of, philosophical conversation to have, and I think it is, we need to, it's important, because we don't know. And since we don't know, we do need to have some idea of the kinds of eventualities that we might come across. And that is a thing that could happen. If it's a thing that did happen in a society like that, what do we do with him? This is a messy thing to think about, because if we are going to stick to our guns all the way, talk about true liberty and no state. Well, first of all, I should be clear that like a lack of state does not mean a lack of law. And this is one of the big things I really needed to clear up before we get into the specifics of this.
Thank you. I was like, yep, because that's the missing piece.
It really matters. It really matters. That just because there's no state doesn't mean there's no rules. And this is, I was saying the other night about how like anarchism is wildly misunderstood, and especially in the U.S. generally speaking, we use the word anarchy to mean like it is synonymous with chaos.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way it's used colloquially, but that's not what it means as a socioeconomic theory or sociopolitical theory. Anarchism is not chaos. It is not the lack of rule. Or rather, it's the lack of ruler. It's not a lack of rules. The symbol, the anarchist symbol, the A with the circle around it?
Yeah.
The circle is not a circle. It's an O. The O stands for order. It's integral. Order is very, very important to anarchists. Not something you usually think of, but that's just true of the philosophy. We would all have to agree on what the rules would be, and they would have to be clear and succinct. They would come about democratically rather than being imposed by a state with a
democracy, not what we think of democracy in the U.S. That's
not representative democracy, true democracy, where the people collectively decide how things will be done, what the rules are, etc.
Yeah.
So we could very easily all get together and agree: no murders, no theft of personal property, no rapes, no arson, etc. Like the really obvious, easy things. Somebody should break one of those rules. What do we do with them? I think it depends on the severity of the rule break, whatever the particular. I don't want to say crime. I don't like the word crime because it implies the kind of system of law that we have now, which is not what we would probably have in the post-capitalist, post-revolution world. What we do with them depends on the severity of the infraction, of the antisocial behavior. If what we're talking about is somebody stole something from someone else, I imagine that would actually be pretty easy to rehabilitate. Like,
right.
Whatever it is you have, or what it is you don't have that somebody else had that you wanted, you could have procured through completely pro-social means. There was no reason you needed to take it from somebody else's possession. That didn't need to happen. You could have
Right.
you could have had it just fine, without any cost to you, and without any cost to the society at large, and without any cost to any individual member of the society. Like, you can be taught that. That's easy. You kill somebody else, the consequence is probably more severe. And in the case of something that is specifically a racially motivated mass killing, I do still think for humanity's sake, an attempt should be made to rehabilitate a person like that, because they're clearly dealing with something unresolved. You don't come to be a literal murderous racist without some kind of external influence.
Right.
That's not something you're just born with. Nobody just is that inherently, right? Like, that's something you have to be taught.
Yeah, that's something you're taught. I understand that.
Now, if for some reason it should actually get them as far as actually killing people, I think we need to, and I'm hesitant to say this out loud on the internet because I know it runs so counter to what we think of as justice now. But I think that a person, even if they made it that far, even if they committed something that horrible, should be given the chance at rehabilitation. Now, they'd need to be detained, although a prison, which is what it would effectively be in a society like that, would look very different from what it does now, because we need to start thinking of that kind of detainment as rehabilitative, not punitive, whereas currently it is nothing but punitive. And we know from how many years, how many decades and decades of doing that it doesn't help the problem. It does not treat criminality. It does not do anything to reduce recidivism rates. It doesn't do any good. It removes those people from our society for a time and then often reintroduces them to it with absolutely no preparation to get back into it. So we would need to always have an eye toward turning that person, not that specific part, whatever it was they were being detained for.
Yeah.
We need to work toward finding ways to make those people understand that the kinds of behaviors they were exhibiting were harmful to the whole, and to understand why it's beneficial to everyone, including them, if they were willing and able to behave in pro-social ways, to have a contribution mindset rather than a deprivation mindset.
I think we're that, and
But as far as dealing with people who actually do the really heinous shit,
yeah,
I need to be very clear here, because I realize that I'm kind of trying to ease into that gently, because again, there's a lot of nuance here. There's a lot of layers of horrible.
Yeah.
You can be kind of horrible, but not super super harmful. But you can be pretty fucking both.
Yeah.
The worst of the worst. What got me thinking about this was because I as I got started thinking about all this different stuff, and I got thinking about more and more how, well, what is the difference between rehabilitation and punishment? That maybe somebody who does something kind of bad can be rehabilitated rather than punished, but that our current heavy finger quotes justice system absolutely fails to address is that, well, how punitive measures don't actually do anything to solve the problem. They just make us feel better about having to have been hurt. Yeah. Because we hurt them back. But that doesn't do anything better for society. That doesn't help the person, and it doesn't help the society that they could contribute to if only they could be made to see how they would be capable of it. Most people don't do stuff like this. Most people don't do stuff like this to cause harm. They do it in response to perceived harm. Generally, I think, if they've managed to somehow be convinced by the furthest right voices that, for instance, black people are the reason why they don't have the best job in the world right now, or why their position is like in some way compromised because we're making concessions to people of minority classes. It's bullshit. It's fucking it's bullshit. It's completely incorrect. But people can be and currently are convinced that that's true, and in the worst cases, it can make them perform extreme acts. I think that we should be able to say that they should know better. Makes us, as non-right-wingers, feel really good when we can say, fucking, but shouldn't you just know better? Well, I still agree, yeah. You should just know better. You fucking should be able to just tell the difference between what's going to fucking hurt people and what's not. And what's caused your pain and what's not. The plain fact, though, is that most people can't. Most people don't actually know the difference. And most people will take whatever scapegoat they're offered because they just need an easy answer to why they're hurting right now. I don't mean to sound sympathetic to serial killers. I'm really super not. But we do need to understand where their attitudes come from and what motivates their actions. And that's not something we put a lot of stock in right now. That's not something we really do very much. We want whatever makes us feel good. We're not as concerned about what will actually solve the problem.
And, okay, so this is weird because I'm trying to say this in a way that doesn't make me sound like a monster.
Are you saying you want to kill them?
Yes,
because
absolutely.
I'm saying this is what I was trying to get around to. In the most extreme cases, we probably will need to.
Okay, because
we're probably going to need to fucking
whatever is best
reconcile.
for-
We need to understand that there is a likelihood that those worst of the worst people will still continue to exist. We don't know that. And it may not be the case.
Yep.
If we can actually get people into the kind of fucking scenario where they can come into life actually free and actually equal, those kind of occurrences may fall off. That might not be a thing. Antisocial behavior could stop if people had absolutely no reason to think it would solve whatever problem it is they're currently perceiving. That might be possible, but we have no reason to think that it definitely will be. And so we do have to be prepared for the possibility that there will be social deviants that are so fucked up that they will cause unspeakable harm to other people. And I think that a lot of what you'll hear from anarchists is that, first option is rehabilitation. If that doesn't work, it's exile. I say for people who cannot be rehabilitated, provided that's even a real thing. If they cannot be rehabilitated, but their antisocial behavior isn't physically harmful, if they're not violent, if we don't have any reason to suspect that they would commit murder or maiming, then they can be exiled, and we can wish them the best, but we have no reason to support them. That's fine. But I got to thinking about this, and I was like, well, what about the worst of the worst? Like, what if I don't know why, but specifically Ted Bundy came into my mind, and I was like, I mean, was what was wrong with him born of the society, or was it his own mind actually being that fucking shattered? Like, whatever it was about him that was absolutely so broken that he needed to travel across the country just killing, what was it, like 37 women or something that I think that he claimed, but that not all of them were even found. I mean, assuming, again, because this is a hypothetical, assuming that he was just that fucked up, if he was that fully broken, that's what he would have done no matter what society he was brought up in, no matter how he was raised, no matter how well he was taken care of by his fellow humans, right? If he was just so fucked up, that's what he was going to do, no matter what. If we knew that for sure, if we knew that despite the best of all possible worlds, he had already committed several murders, could we ever get away with just exiling him? Because wouldn't we know for sure, given his extremely like just perversely charming personality?
Yeah, exactly.
How very he was amazing at getting himself into other people's heads, and it's fucking disgusting, but it's true. It's what he did. He did it all. I think the judge that condemned him to death admitted to liking him, despite being all the way aware of all the horrible, hideous shit he did.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the kind of character.
Sorry, no, you're good. I was just about to bring up, like, those are the people that I would be worried about.
Same.
In that system, because it is from all accounts except for his growing up life was normal.
Yeah.
Had a sweet mom,
Yeah.
his family was just normal. He was just that fucked up. But the problem,
That seems to be the case, yeah.
the problem with, at least for people like him who are so charming, with trying to rehabilitate them first. Rehabilitate. That is a difficult word to say.
You would never know if you'd actually succeeded.
Exactly.
I know.
Yeah. So
That
they
this
could
is-
convince you
That
that
would-
you've succeeded,
well,
that they're rehabilitated,
yes.
but then get back out there and kill again. Would it be automatic death penalty?
Right. Well, okay. So I've thought through all this. Like, this is every single step of the way. I'm like, well, but there's an exception. Well, but there's an answer to that too. is if we decided on exile, we couldn't be absolutely certain that he would agree to that. He could say he did, right? Like, on its face, he could say, fine, then I'll just leave. We couldn't guarantee that. He could stick around and keep killing.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a problem. Let's say he
Yep.
did, though. Let's say he actually did. We kick him out, say, fuck off. You're gone. You can't stay here. And he does leave. All we're doing then, effectively, is just making him a problem for the next commune that he approaches.
Exactly.
So that's fundamentally immoral. We can't do that. So as far as I can tell, then we established that this is definitely an incurably dangerous person. We have exactly two options: permanent lockup and execution. And permanent lockup is only a sure thing if the impossibility of escape is 100% guaranteed.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's still a drain, though. Like, we have to acknowledge, if that's the route we choose to go for the sake of humanity, we have to know that we're going to be paying with our own labor communally to feed, clothe, and shelter him for the rest of his life. And I think, given that, even though I know that there are going to be plenty of centrists who are going to fucking hate me for saying it, but the straight truth is that it actually would be more humane to execute him than it would be to lock him up indefinitely. Because if you execute him, then you are sparing society any threat of future violence from him, and you're sparing him a life of isolation.
Yeah.
I know, like, at this point, we're probably past even wanting to think humanely about him, but I do think we have a little bit of an obligation to do that, even if he has caused suffering. And it would be better for him to stop being alive than it would be to live a life of isolation. We know that isolation is very nearly the worst thing you can do to a person. Solitary confinement is, like, has worse psychological effects on a person than actual physical torture. That's proven. That's a thing we know for sure. Now, we might want to say an eye for an eye. We want to get ours. We have a vengeance mindset, maybe, where he caused us pain and we want to cause him pain. But, like, does that do anything to make anything better? Like, does that actually help society at all? If we're willing to hurt a person just for hurting someone else, I mean, like, cause them pain, not end their life, but just to want to inflict pain because pain has been inflicted. We know damn well by now that doesn't actually help. That doesn't make us feel any better long term, and it doesn't do anything for society. It just makes us feel better for a moment. If we address the underlying problems that lead to those kinds of behaviors in the first place, we'd probably have more success.
And in that's why I find your approach interesting, because you're absolutely right, and it's hard because
I know
for me, looking at this strictly through the racial lens, and that would be a tough thing to give up.
Yeah.
Because why I brought up that Charleston shooter idea, it brings back memories of when you felt like your people were nothing. So when you see that guy walking around getting arrested and not, like, basically being thrown in jail for it, it's absolutely fascinating, because on the flip side, I've seen, like you said, black men getting shot for having expired license plates. So
this actually brings this back around to something you brought up earlier that I want to talk about. You mentioned about the not having a state means not having law enforcement, and you can see how that would be a problem for you or for minorities in general. I wanted to ask about how exactly. Well, I mean, you just talked about an encounter you had. It was last night.
Yeah. Well, it's a couple.
Well, whatever. Within the last couple of nights, that, like, just in the last few days, you've been targeted for no good reason.
So what does the current system do for me now?
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm asking. Like, how does having law enforcement protect you as a black man now?
You are absolutely right. And that is something with any of the toughest part about any form of government, especially growing up here, or non-government for that matter, is putting a trust into a system that you don't know whether or not it cares about you.
Yes.
So all systems put in place, I think from a minority standpoint, you would have that hesitancy.
I think furthermore, that anybody who is not a person of means has every reason to distrust the police. because the police don't exist to serve and protect the people. The police exist to protect property.
Yeah.
This is why rich people, on the rare occasion that they even get arrested, they don't spend the night even in jail. Like they just put the money up. And the more money you have, and this is again, this isn't speculation. This is just the way it is. You have enough money to get out of an arrest, then you just get out of the arrest. You have enough money to like not serve time, you just don't serve time. You just pay. You just pay the money, and you go home. Like you don't even get let out of the courthouse in cuffs. You just go home.
Yeah.
People with wealth don't get treated the same way by the legal system as people who don't have it, and not to equate, any given non-wealthy white guy with any black guy. Any black guy is like way more at risk of police violence, like dramatically more than any given white guy. But I'm saying that the law enforcement does not just protect the common people. It's in place to protect the wealthy.
And see, and this is where I am a complete and total contradiction to myself. Though that happened to me, and though I get extremely frustrated by watching people who look like me have to go through things that they shouldn't have to go through. On a whole, I support probably the police a lot more than even Amanda does. Well, than I know that Amanda does. Because I've met great officers. I've met officers who have actually kept me safe.
I've exactly once had an unpleasant interaction with a police officer, and it was a city cop, and he was being an absolute dick about a parking ticket. It was a stupid situation. He was just in a fucking bad mood, and I was his target at the moment. That was one off. That was some stupid bullshit. I have been pulled over a bunch of times. I've had just passing interactions with him. Almost every time I've ever had to personally interact with a policeman, even when I was being pulled over, even when I was either suspected of something or straight up definitely guilty of something, has been extremely pleasant. Not even just professional, like actually pleasant. I don't have any ill will whatsoever toward individual police. Like the officers themselves, maybe they tend to be solid guys, maybe they don't. I've been lucky enough to have only interacted with pleasant guys. I am still completely against the police. 100%. 100%. Not because I think that they themselves are actual individual dicks. I think that the police are the manifestation of the state's monopoly on violence, and I have a problem with that.
That makes sense. I get that.
Big problem with that.
That makes sense.
Because what they don't. Oh, this is what I was getting at earlier. They don't protect us. What they do is they protect the state from us. That's their real function. And I'm not okay with that, because we're supposed to have power over the state, but the state has arranged itself such that it has ultimate power over us at all times in all things. That's not how this is supposed to work, but that is that's the practical reality of our system. And nobody who claims to believe in freedom could be for that. You just can't. You can't have that. You can't have that without also being a fascist.
No, I get that. That makes sense.
So RJ, you were talking about land ownership and whatnot, and I mentioned at the time that there was a distinction to be made between personal property and private property.
Yes.
We do not advocate for the seizure of personal property. We advocate for the seizure of private property, which in socialist terms specifically means privately owned land and not, again, personally owned land. Okay. What the difference between private property and personal property is what an individual or a family or whatever owns. So, like, nobody would come and take your house and your yard for, like, nobody wants your land.
Okay.
That's your land. Like, you just have that. You like, keep your yard. Nobody wants, like, build shit in your yard. Private property either means the means of production. So basically the fields, factories, and workshops.
Okay.
Again, shout outs to Kropotkin. That's a title of a book he wrote about that. But also it's applicable because it's literally those things, the fields, factories, and workshops. Or in the case of landlords, the way we think of them now, the way they thought of them in 1892 also, but that was different. But also that nobody would own, well, rather the company that owns my apartment,
Right.
and the whole building and the land that it's built on, we'd seize that. We the people would.
Okay.
So like it's private property, not because it's privately owned, although that does, I mean, necessarily go with the territory, but it's private property if it is used to exploit someone else.
Okay, I get what you mean. All right.
Yeah. So like in the revolution, I would then take ownership of this apartment.
Okay.
It wouldn't be revolutionaries taking this apartment from me, kicking me out of my home, and then redistributing it. I already live here, and that makes it mine, as opposed to it being owned by the people who currently claim ownership of it.
And then at that point, as a whole, you would take care of the maintenance of it.
All of us would together, yes.
Yeah, that's what I said, as a whole. Okay.
Yes. And for that reason, this computer, this microphone that I just bought, this continues to be mine. The giant-ass TV in my living room, that's still mine. Nobody's going to take that from me. Nobody wants my personal property. We all want to take the private property of the people who hold it against us.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Okay. That makes sense.
That's where the difference is between personal property and private property.
That makes sense.
We want to maintain our personal property, but abolish private property.
I get that. That makes more sense. The only other thing, and this is
it's a thing that most people don't understand, because like when you say private versus personal, like those sound like the same thing, and also that most people don't understand that there even is a distinction to be made in the first place. And so when you say that we want to seize the means of production, it sounds like we just want to take everything everyone has.
Right.
Or that we want to abolish private property. It means we just want to we want to take everything everyone has, put it in a giant pile, and then redistribute it to everyone. And like that's not only dumb, it's impractical. Like, you couldn't do that.
Yeah.
You couldn't actually enact that. That couldn't be done. So, no, that's a fucking that's a sophomore idea of what redistribution of wealth means, and it's an absolutely untenable idea of what it means to redistribute wealth and what it means to want to abolish private property.
The weird thing is, and it sounds like like a very interesting idea, and in its application, I'm sure you would run into a lot of hardships, but its end goal would be fascinating. But you ever think about like just small things and how that would work? Like the first thing that popped in my head when I was listening to what you guys want to do and the awesomeness behind it, would you be able to take vacations?
Yeah.
Like,
why not?
Would a place like, I don't want to just use Vegas for just Vegas' sake. But how would Vegas work?
Vegas would cease to exist in its current form.
And that's what I'm thinking. Like,
well, hold on though. Hold on. This is actually really relevant. I'm glad you asked this way, because this is a question that I come across really, really frequently. Is essentially like somebody asked the other day. Actually, I don't know. I think it was probably like a month ago or something. But they were asking about like how. Man, I wish it was easier to like search my Reddit history, because I could actually just read you our conversation. It would be a lot probably faster and more succinct. But basically, he was asking about like how personal property would cease to have comparative value, and he was specifically talking about housing. Like, although he was coming at it from a weird angle, and I don't think he was American, so I don't know where he was from for sure. Only that the way he thought of like housing values was kind of reverse of the American mindset. Like, the closer you are to a city, a major city, like the more expensive housing tends to be.
Right.
Until you get into the actual city, where it becomes like it skyrockets, like the price of a tiny little apartment can be ridiculous if you're actually in the heart of the city. Whereas like, you get out into the tail end of the suburbs, and now you're in like affordable to the average person territory. Mm-hmm. He had this idea that like living in the heart of the city was cheap as all shit, and like being out in the country was where you wanted to be. And I found that kind of fascinating, just that it was a different perspective on how things work, because as Americans, we tend to want to be in the heart of things. not always the case in other parts of the world. But anyway,
well, you know what? It also depends on what part of America you're in too.
it does,
Because,
and it depends on what your individual values are. Also,
Yeah.
this is kind of one of the points I made to him was like, you have to understand that not everybody wants to live in the country. Not everybody wants to live in the middle of the city. There's no reason to believe that a place on the outskirts of the suburbs has either inherently less or more value than a place in any other place. It's not about whether it has inherent value. It's everything about how it's subjectively valued by the people who might want to live there. So the answer to the question is no. It doesn't have inherently higher or lower value. It only is worth what it's worth to whoever wants it.
Whoever wants it, yeah. I agree.
You know?
Vegas in its current state.
Sorry?
Vacations.
Vacations. You paused. I didn't know if you had forgotten where we were.
I did, and I was about to ask where
Yep.
that question came from. What it was you originally asked that got me on that. So vacations.
It was the idea of some place like a Vegas, or even not.
Oh yeah, Vegas. Okay, so not vacations, but Vegas.
Yeah.
Okay, because like as to taking a vacation, like there's no reason you couldn't. If we were in a stateless, currency-less society, like you're free to go wherever. Like, like passports aren't a thing. Assuming this is actually like a new society for real, a worldwide, and for it to work, I kind of believe it would need to be. I mean, it has to start somewhere, but it needs to end up being everywhere, or someone with different goals is probably going to start being real antagonistic militarily, and that can cause problems. I don't think we're going to get around to it tonight. I don't think we can afford to get rid of military forces yet. Even if we accomplish the revolution, I think until this actually makes it across the entire world, we would still need a force.
Oh yeah, because the rest of the world was
strictly protective. Strictly protective.
Very Switzerland.
And this is something we would probably have a bit of a problem with in the U.S. If this is where this started, we'd have a bit of a problem with it because the U.S. has never stopped being imperialist.
Nope.
And things would need to change. But anyway, that's a topic for another time.
Yeah, back to
Vegas. What we got started thinking about was he had the idea, this guy, to go back to it because it was actually part of the same conversation, was he was thinking that, he was assuming that nobody would want to live in the city proper. And I don't really understand why. That's just not something I've ever really been exposed to. There's always, wherever there's a city, there's people who want to live in it. Yeah. But he had this idea that basically, I'm sorry?
Or else there wouldn't be a city.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's not just an economic center. People don't, and this was what he was assuming. And what I had to kind of clarify was like, dude, cities don't just like die at night. People don't go there to work their 9 to 5 and then abandon the place, and the city's just dark from outside of office hours, right? Like people leave the office and then they like go 2 blocks down and up a few floors, and that's where they live, and they like get a shower and get changed, and then they come back down to street level and they grab dinner, and then they go out to a bar, and then they hit a theater for a stand-up show, and then they go out to more bars, and then they go back home and they fuck, and then they go to bed and they go to work the next morning. Like that's life. Like that's, the city doesn't just die overnight. No city does. So for like, and I was like, given that that's the case, that there are people who already live there, maybe there are people who live there who don't want to live there. So in this kind of society, they could just not. They could go out to the suburbs or out to the country or wherever they want to be, because there's nothing holding them back from doing that other than availability of housing. The only thing affecting the availability of housing is how many people are currently building houses. But there are tons of people who like have house building experience and who have the desire to continue to build houses. They build houses because they like building houses. So you hook yourselves up with a local builders union and say, hey guys, me and my SO totally like need a place. Can you help us out? And then you work with them to build the place, and now you have a place. Simple as that.
Yeah.
Like, there really does not need to be a more complicated economic exchange than that.
Right.
Because like the materials necessary to build houses are super plentiful. So, like, we're not about to run out of wood or drywall to fucking build a house.
As long as we, take care of the environment.
Yeah, but I think
obviously there's a level of
what you guys are proposing and why I think it would be beneficial to everybody, at least in this regard, is I think that you would stop a lot of the
Because so much
over
of that is due to exploitation for capitalistic purposes.
exact trying to basically you have a bunch of hoarders who are like, I need to grab as much of this as I
Yes.
can and put it into my own stockpile.
If we only
But
actually collected as much as we needed to use, we'd be a lot easier on the planet, even with our ridiculous numbers these days.
Yeah.
But so for a city, Las Vegas or any other city, okay, sure, the death of capitalism would mean the death of casinos, for sure. Like, casinos are done. But the thing is, like,
Vegas is
though
more than
that's what Vegas is known for, but that's not all there is there. Vegas is a cultural hub. Vegas is
Absolutely.
full of all kinds of other entertainment options. What I was saying to the guy in this scenario was, like, in the same way that there is such a thing as a nightlife in a city, there's no reason to think that life in the city would stop. Like, sure, the restaurants, the bars, the theaters, music venues, etc., they would cease to be privately owned. Nobody would be making a profit off of the use of them, but they're there already.
Right.
They exist. Why would we assume they would just cease operation? Why would we assume that, like, they would just stop being used just because nobody's making money off of it? People still want the services they provide. So anybody who wants to work in that restaurant just does that now.
They don't have to worry about anything else.
That's it. They just do
want
that
to
now. Anybody who wants to work in that theater, they don't need to worry about giving up their livelihood to work in the theater. Now they just work in the fucking theater. So
That's
anybody
fair.
who wants to go see a show at the theater, there's going to be shows at the theater. The theater already exists, and we can take it for granted that there are people who want to work there and do the theater, whether that's the technical theater aspect of dealing with lighting, sound design, effects, whether it's people who want to act, whether it's people who merely want to maintain. And that can be people who do rigging work, people who maintain rigging and line sets, whether that's people who are totally content, actually happy to be in that environment and be janitors. There's no reason to think that these people don't exist. People actually want to do this work, and they want to do it in that particular environment for these particular reasons. There's no reason to think that that would just cease. It would actually be more. It would be easier to access because now nobody actually depends on it for a living. They just do it because they want to, and it provides a service to people who want it.
Yeah, because there are plenty of like aspiring actors or writers or whatever who give up on that dream because they need to make a living.
Yes, and that's kind of the whole idea is, and what to keep it practical, right? To stay realistic, what Kropotkin proposed was everybody works, everyone, without exception, provided you're able-bodied, was you work roughly 1,200 to 1,500 hours a year, which, to put that in real terms, that's 23 to 29 hours a week. On helping to produce the necessaries of life, which is to say food, shelter, clothing, basically. Now, we're to a point now where that's probably not necessary. We have way more people than they did in 1890. We had way more people now on the earth than we did in 1892. And automation, which Kropotkin predicted, and I absolutely love this. Back in 1892, he envisioned so much of the world we actually have today. It's uncanny. It is fucking unreal how much he got right 130 years ago. It's freaky.
One of the points, one of the explanations in The Host of the alien society, the host consciousness was asking the alien, well, like, who cleans up, like, who takes the trash to the dump, or who does the recycling, or how do you keep the streets so clean? And the alien was just like, well, we all do.
Maya read Kropotkin, I'm telling you. She did. She had to have. Like, this is... Oh, but she didn't necessarily have to, though. This is the thing. Is, I mean, reading him did absolutely change my perspective on basically everything, but only because I felt legitimated. Like, that you really spend enough time thinking about this stuff. It's not that hard to arrive at on your own. You look at the world we have now, the ridiculous wealth, and I don't mean the dollars that exist. I mean the wealth of all the things we have, all the ways we have to make things, all the... Get real practical about numbers. We produce 50% more food than we need in this country to feed everyone in this country.
Mm-hmm.
150% as much food as we need is what we produce. 12% of us still go hungry every day.
Mm-hmm.
The means of production is already there. Nothing new needs to happen, except for we need to actually get that food to the people who need it. That's all that needs to change. We don't need to make more food than we make. We already make well more than enough. There are 6 empty homes for every single homeless person in this country. Why is anyone homeless?
Mm-hmm.
How does that make sense? How does it make sense for somebody to hold a piece of property empty and abandoned just because it's part of their wealth, or just because it belongs to them? How does it make any sense that people should have to sleep in freezing cold on the
Why
street?
are there people that have
How does that make any sense to
a
do?
vacation home when they're
Well, you know what? No, never mind that. Fuck that. That's fine. People who own 2 or 3 homes, despite that, accounting for that, we still have enough empty homes to house literally every single person who doesn't have reliable shelter in this country. So let them have them. People pose this question a lot too. Like, well, what about people with mansions? Fuck it. Who cares? Don't take them away. Let the people who have mansions keep their mansions. And if they think they can actually maintain them, if they think they can keep them orderly and clean on their own, fine. Let them keep it. Who gives a shit? It's not like we're short of housing. We don't need the mansion.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that, we can have this kind of redistribution without actually taking anything from anyone, except for, again, the people who own the means of production. And the reason it's not okay for them to own the means of production is because they use that to exploit those of us who don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's not theoretical. That's the way capitalism works. It has to, or it can't be capitalism.
Right.
The capitalist must pay you less than the value you create, or the business doesn't profit and therefore doesn't perpetuate.
Right.
So we argue that that's inherently unjust because your salary doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Like, the salary you earn, that's not charity. Like, that's not anybody's generosity. You're selling your labor.
Yeah.
And in capitalism, you are always necessarily selling your labor for less than it's worth. You have no other option. That's just the way the system works. It has to. It has to, or the business can't continue to exist because it can't continue to grow. And if it can't continue to grow, then it's not viable under capitalism. It can't just maintain. It has to be about growth, always.
That's it.
And so,
This is insightful.
what?
This is insightful.
I know, right? Like,
Like, you're going to give me... Like, I'm going to be thinking about this for the next couple of days now.
once you become aware of it, you can't unlearn it. It hits pretty fucking hard.
It does. Because a lot of what you're taught and a lot of what you see...
Are at odds.
Yeah.
Like, hard.
Yeah. Huh. We might have to end at this one, because this is starting to... You're messing with my head.
I know. I know.
I don't like it.
It's really... It's pretty hard. It's...
You know, I like it, though, because if... This is stuff that should be taught in schools. And I'm mad that it's not.
Thank you.
Because even if it's not something you agree with, it should be something to let you know that there are other ways of viewing the world.
But that's
I think that part of the problem with that, though, is that in doing so, it becomes really, really difficult to disagree. Because I haven't said anything yet that's untrue.
Yeah.
Now, I maybe have proposed some things that you'd go, well, I think I could do it better, and here's how. But you couldn't say,
It's not.
after all this, that the way that things necessarily must work under capitalism is inherently just.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just not. I mean, it just is not. It fucks people over in favor of the people who have more money than they do. And more power necessarily, because under capitalism, wealth always equals power. Because the more money you have, the more shit you can get done. That's just the way it is. And I've done this before, but to straight up steal a quote from Innuendo Studios, when you vote with your dollars, people who have more dollars get more votes.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Yeah. Kind of makes you think a little bit differently about democracy, doesn't it?
Oh, well, yeah. Because, oh, man.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. We may have to change the title of the show.
No, this is still us having thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just entirely new ones.
Our tagline may have to change.
So we do need to cut it because it is late, but I think next time we need to get a little bit more, because I didn't address this, and I do think I have a responsibility to. If I'm going to be the one pushing this idea, we need to talk about why racial differences can push past this hurdle. Because we didn't cross that. We really didn't address that at all. And I think it can. I guess as a quick little synopsis of that, just a real quick teaser for why I don't think that necessarily would be as big a problem as we might, from our current perspective, think of it as being, is because we need to think about where any kind of bigotry even comes from. What is the root of it? What is its origin point? Any kind of bigotry, whether that's racism, sexism, homophobia, anything. We need to think about why we other people, and we need to think about whether or not that comes from the system we've been raised in. If that would serve some kind of a societal advantage to, for instance, white people, to keep white people in power, and if that kind of thing would need to continue to exist outside of the kind of system where we even recognize class. Because capitalism is the sequel to feudalism, basically. Feudalism was people who claimed they own land forcing other people working that land to give them a bit of the produce that they made from working that land. People rebelled against that, and what we ended up with was an equivalent system. Capitalism is really just an advanced form of feudalism, and it only comes down to whoever has the most gains the most. That's just feudalism. I mean, it's not that different. It's a slight twist on the same system. And it is focused on keeping the people who were in power before in power tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
If we weren't so focused on the notion that, unlike in feudalism, under capitalism, what we do have, even though I think it's false, more false than not, we do have the notion that we could advance into that moneyed class, which is to say the ruling class.
Yeah.
We allow Black people to have an equal voice. Hispanic people have a similar voice. Asian people have women to have a similar voice. We're allowing there to be more competition to ourselves. Long as we are convinced that we are to maintain a situation in which we are in competition, the more likely we are to continue to exhibit antagonistic behavior. But it's only in service of us gaining at others' expense, because we are convinced that we can't have anything at all without someone else losing it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No reason to think it actually has to be that way, but under capitalism it absolutely has to be that way. I think that's what perpetuates it largely. I don't think that there's anything inherently racist about any person. I think that we are convinced that we can't let other people raise to the same level we're at because it threatens our position. Even though we don't have a position to threaten.
I am looking forward to having that conversation.
Absolutely.
Same.
Because though I would love to completely agree.
I know, right? I know.
Everything in me wants to be like, you're right. It's nurture. It's not nature.
That's the long fabled part 4.
Yeah,
I'm going to go ahead and reveal it right now, even though I'm sure if anybody's been paying attention, they probably guessed.
Mm-hmm.
Part 4 is human nature, and I cannot wait to dive into that, because I have thoughts.
Yes, we have some thoughts.
So, for tonight, at the very end of a very, very, good Lord, long recording session, long episode. You guys, you don't know. This is not going to be as long as, well, it's 11:15. I'm not going to tell you when we started recording because you're going to wonder where the hell all the content went. So we had an outro, but straight up, I just didn't like it. It didn't sound very good. It was totally impromptu, and we'll plan better next time. Meantime, thank you so much for joining us. That's our show for tonight. If you wouldn't mind throwing us a like or a subscribe, we'd really appreciate it. Much love from us. Have a good night, everybody.